Shabbat Shalom. We're going to talk about light and darkness, coming of Messiah, and his coming in the Bible is described always as a situation in the middle of chaos, in the middle of darkness. There's something to be repaired, there's something to be restored. So of course it's not just a nice way of coming to earth and having festivities and stuff like that. No, there is work to be done. So this is what we're going to see, how it all points at us. Also, let's begin with the first text of today. It's Numbers chapter 8, verse 1 through 4 of a larger content. And here we go. Adonai spoke to Moses, "Speak to Aaron and tell him." It's nice to realize when you read these words that you don't continue fast, quickly, but that you stand still and realize that Adonai, God, spoke to Moses. And he heard. And he not only had a kind of an impression, or yes, I feel that God is directing me to this kind of decision. No, it's words. And he's writing them down. So it's really special. What an amount of light, of spirit, of enlightenment this Moses must have had. Adonai spoke to Moses and he said, "Speak to Aaron and tell him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand." And the translation is sometimes a little off. This one is a little off because what it literally is that the lamps will enlighten the light standard itself. Aaron did so. He lit its lamps to light the area in front of the lampstand. This is a way of translating I'm showing you, and there are more last week also translations that are not correct, but this is the freer translation to get a better, nicer, easier way of reading English. Yet at the same time, these guys sometimes play with the text where it's not so literal anymore. Anyway, we'll continue and I'll explain. Aaron did so. He lit his lamps, and as Adonai commanded Moses, this was the workmanship of the lampstand, beaten work of gold. From its base to its flowers, it was beaten work, according to the pattern which Adonai had shown to Moses. So he made the lampstand. This is a text, and in a little bit of odd English, the literal thing is that the lamp holders were not shining forward, but they were directed at the middle stem, shall I say, of this candle, this lamp holder, this menorah in Hebrew, to shine, to enlighten the menorah itself. It looks as if this different world than our world, where God's kingdom is a world of light. There's no darkness, there's no dark places, there's light. No sharp light, no light that will make you tired, not hot light, but healing light and well-being light and communicating light. I'm saying this last part because I believe that God is communicating through his light. It's just not a lamp like in one of the Psalms 119, where it says that God's light is a light for my feet, like we have some kind of a light to shine on the road, as those words are sometimes translated. Translation is a lot, huh? It's really setting you in a different direction or in the right direction. It depends. No, the light is the communication itself, is making the path, is the path. And it is to be compared in this modern world with modern ways of electronics and stuff like that, where we have cables, glass, fiber cables, and light signals go through them, and they are decoded, and then they make sound, and video, and audio. In this way is God is also communicating. One of the parts of this desert shrine has been that there was light in a candlestick, shall I say, but then for 7 lights. Light that had to make something visible of the light in the heavenly spheres. The image of the lamps that were lit by sun going down was a continuing remembrance that in the same way God's heavenly light is enlightening his children, shall we call them, in our darkness. It's perhaps strange to understand, but the light, the lamp holder in the desert temple, this tent of meeting, is showing that there is darkness in our world, because those lamps were lit when the darkness started to set in. And you read this in Exodus chapter 30, verse 8. It comes on the screen also, and you can read with me. When Aaron lights the lamps at evening, and so forth. Just a short text to enlighten our understanding. Earthly light starting to shine, and not only shine forward, but projecting the standard itself. When earthly darkness started to set in, heavenly light to enlighten heavenly darkness, which we can have as well. We can have darkness when it's dark, when the sun is down and stuff like that. But there's also spiritual darkness that can be there. And when you are in this darkness and you think you can see, there's no way that you can be convinced that you are in this darkness. So it's difficult. It's difficult stuff. Fake news is only fake news for those who realize it's fake news. For those who believe in that kind of news, it's not fake news, and they think they are reading the truth. So who can convince who? This desert lampstand shows another way of darkness of this world. If you look at the last text of the Torah last week, the last text, the last words, it talks about the gifts and the sacrifices of the tribal leaders of Israel. And then today the text starts with a short description of this light stand, which was already in more extension talked about in the Parshat Truma, which is to be found in Exodus chapter 25, the verses 31 through 39. I'm not going to read them, but that's what it is. Exodus 25, verses 31 through 39. So it starts with this description of light, and then after that the dedication of the Levites is described. So the question comes up, and I hope that you will pick up on this asking questions. The Bible is written for people to ask questions, to read and to find then the holes that are there, the lacking of information at certain places. For instance, we are asked to celebrate Shabbat, and it doesn't say how, hardly. So we have traditions and they differ, but hey, that's a natural thing to do, or a spiritual thing, because there is no description of how. And so there are many places in the Bible where things are said that are not explained, so there is this piece as well. There's in the Bible there's text about stoning, with a stone killing someone to death as an execution, but it doesn't say if this really should be done. And we find out that in Jewish understanding it should not be done. It is to be seen as a warning, never to reach that moment where this should be executed. So there is this piece of the light, and then the dedication of the Levites. So the question then is, why this short piece all of a sudden sandwiched in the text before the text continues? Because the Levites were not involved in the dedication of this tabernacle in the desert, and so they are described in the text following this light piece of text. Evidently, this short piece is not there without a purpose, and it describes something important as, or even perhaps more, but very important, which is the task of priests in their executing the menorah functioning, the lighting, in the morning the cleaning, and the preparation for the evening to lit it again. So there is the daily task, but there is something more here. The Eternal One, the Lord, of course knows what happens in history from beginning till end of human history. He knows. And so with this stand, this lamp stand, he also realizes that there will be a time like now when there is no temple and no menorah, as the Hebrew word goes, anymore. He knows that. And there's a purpose for having it and then not having it anymore. If he wanted to, it would be there. But it's not. There has been a time where Syrian soldiers came to Israel. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed this light stand, and the oil that was used in order to lit the lamps, and so the light of Israel has been stolen before in the time of the Maccabees, 167 in before Christian era. And priests, descendants of Aaron, would come and have and fulfill this honorable role to restore the light again. This was in the year 160. There was a 7-year war before Common Era. God knew it, and so it was important to have this light stand in the tent of the meetings in order to realize, now you have it, now you don't, and realize that the earthly material things can be replaced, can be restored, but the original is there anyway, with or without the earthly exponent. Light in the Bible is not a nice thing to have, a festivity kind of thing, advertisements in with lamps and for yards and homes and stuff like that. No, God is communicating through light. Light is his way of communication. There is an interesting example, of course, in the book of Acts, where there is light on the heads, some kind of strange light. It's not fire, it's as if it is fire with tongues of fire, but it is light, and it is a way of communicating. And the people who underwent this experience realize that they feel there is something going on with them. They are able to speak in languages called tongues, sometimes translated as, but languages of the people that were downstairs on ground zero. So light is God's way of communicating. We need a decoder called his Spirit in order to realize what God is communicating. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, you find another example of this. It's in the screen also. A flame of fire out of the midst of a thorny bush. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the calling of Moses when he is shepherd with the sheep of his father-in-law, Jethro. And he has this incredible experience of light. It's also called fire, but it's not a normal fire because it doesn't consume this thorny bush. And that's a very important detail. It's light that doesn't consume, or fire which doesn't consume. So it's not fire in the literal sense as we know it. It's light. And in order to understand, for Moses to understand what the light was saying, the angel of the Lord is there, and God himself is there in this bush to be the translator, the interpreter, and to tell Moses what was going on. Also an interesting picture for Moses to see what is going on in heaven, where God lives in light. Paul knows this, and with Paul, rabbis at this time knew about this. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 16, we read the next interesting words. Read with me on the screen. The Lord, who alone has immortality, dwelling in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen nor can see, to whom be honor and eternal power. Amen. Now, interesting text. 1 Timothy, Paul says in this letter to Timothy that only God has immortality. You might say, well, we are immortal also because he has given us this. Yes, there's the difference. God has immortality. We are borrowed immortality. Like Adam and Eve had immortality if they would continue to eat from the tree of life in paradise. They had to be driven away in order to cut off this immortality thing, which is only on loan, in a way of saying. Dwelling in unapproachable light. Very interesting sentence. Unapproachable light. That's where he's dwelling in. Like this thorny bush on the mount where Moses met God on earth. But not only that, it is unapproachable. No man can see or can has seen or can see God in this heavenly situation. That means that it has an incredible consequence about Messiah. The only way that we see God moving on earth, or promising to move on earth, or to come to us on earth, the only way that God can do that is not in this invisible thing, but in this visible situation. That means that when he comes to earth, that is what we call Messiah. And it is in different manifestations and different appearances. So we cannot say that only Messiah 2000 years ago is Messiah. It's in different ways. It's the arm, the hand that writes words in the palace of Babylon. The man in the oven in the book of Daniel, and somebody in paradise, somebody perhaps that Joseph met on his way to find his brothers, and things like that. Anytime God descending on Mount Sinai, being this Messiah figure, because God himself is invisible and unapproachable, that. So that is important to know, that God is able to come on earth, and that in that way there is no one who can seriously say that a Jewish man, being Yeshua, is an invention of people to make him into a God. No, this is the way the Bible describes it. God is unapproachable. For people to meet a person on earth, God has to come as Messiah on earth, as an angel of light, but in the good sense. Don't take me wrong. And this person on earth, who has appeared many times, is a person of flesh and blood, but he is God himself. I'll show you that in the text in Zachariah, because it says it there literally. God lives in light, like it says in 1 Timothy. In fact, God is light. In 1 John chapter 1 verse 5, it says that. We'll read. This is the message which we have heard from himself, from Yeshua. He knew this, and announced to you that God is light. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Very interesting statement. In order for God to communicate with people, he has to use his light as a communicating means. In order to be seen, he has to project himself into a person of 3 dimensions. And he's cleansing also with that light, with this fire dash light. Cleansing, like it's written, for instance, but not by far not the only text. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 and 13. If anyone builds on the foundation, and to understand what this foundation term means, it's Paul, who is an evangelist, who is talking about Messiah, who is Torah observing. Yeshua himself is totally Torah observing, with all the grace of God that is mentioned in Torah, the Torah of Moses. They are Jews that are honoring God by executing, by applying all the commandments of Torah to their in their utmost dedication. And this foundation is what Paul, who also brought animal sacrifices in the book of Acts, chapter 21. Read it, please. This message, says Paul, which is the foundation. You can build now, when you read this and you realize and you internalize this foundation, you are going to build on it. Your acts are going to be gold, silver, costly stones, or wood, hay, or stubble. Each man's work will be revealed, for the day of judgment will declare it, because it's revealed in light, in fire. And the fire itself, the light, the cleansing light, will test. And you say, well, that's strange, cleansing light, fire cleansing. No, we know that ultraviolet light is a killing kind of light. We know that light can be killing at all. So ultraviolet is a very unhealthy for people. The part of the ultraviolet that is unhealthy. And so this is not strange at all. All these things are connected. The day it's revealed, the fire will test what sort of work each man's work is. Realize, my friends, that we all people on earth are not perfect, and you knew that by looking at yourself, like I am looking at myself. We know that we are not perfect, and that therefore there will be things cleansed away from us, burned away from us. That's how it goes, only for us to be better people when we come out. If the foundation is okay. Now, what is the foundation? I was talking about this Torah observing Jew being Yeshua. If you make somebody else of this Yeshua, somebody who says, I did away with the law, you don't have to do it, I did it for you. If you say that kind of thing, you're making a different, it needs to be the foundation that Yeshua gave of himself and Paul did. Read, please, your Bible. The honorable task of the high priest with the menorah, with this light lampstand, is to lit the lamps when darkness falls. Interesting task. And the gifts and the sacrifices of the last week's text were for the dedication of this tent of meeting, this Mishkan. And faith and dedication, to show those things, faith and dedication, they cost you. They cost you time, they cost you money. And this is what these sacrifices and gifts are showing. Never did Israel have a sanctuary. They came freshly out of Egypt. Everyone who was there, who was present, came out of Egypt or was born on the way from Egypt to this place where they were at the moment that this takes place. Those who came out of Egypt had lived in the land. They saw the beautiful buildings as we find them now in the sand as archaeological findings. They saw the temples, they saw the gold and the silver and the colors and stuff like that. And then they had to go to this from this rich city system of city gods to the desert God of Israel, who was meeting Israel in the hot desert instead of in the luxury of Egypt. Much attention for the gods, much attention for the sun god. Many things visible of these things in the pyramids and in the findings in Egypt that are taking place even today. Those who were born in the desert never saw these things in their lives. So there were different people in the crowd. The Egyptians honored the god of the sun, a very important god they saw, but a god of created light. And Emperor Constantine the Great honored this god as well, and he dedicated a day of the week to this god of the sunlight. And he chose that day and he called it the day of the sunlight, the sunlight day, the sun day. He chose that day of the sun above the biblical day of the Shabbat. It's written, described in a book that I recommend, written by Samuele, Italian name, beautiful name, Samuele Bacchiocchi, Bacchiocchi. Yes, and it's called From Shabbat to Sunday. Constantine the Great was an important factor in this change, where he changed the Bible, where he changed God's words and the whole image. He didn't say it was the day of the resurrection of the Messiah, so we make it into this day, which is changing the law also, because Yeshua says you should not change one letter in the Bible. But this guy, this Emperor Constantine the Great, he thought he was so great. He thought he had the right to change the law and talk about the despicable Jews, that he wanted to show that he can find a better day of the week. What the Romans did in this Roman Empire already before the destruction of the temple, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, was where they stole the light. Again, not only in the year 167 before Common Era, but in the year 70 Common Era, where they stole the light. 40 years before the year 70, there was Yeshua that they stole from the Jewish people. They killed him. They executed him. Israel didn't have the right to do it. Nobody asked for this killing except a small group of corrupt people that were doing this. People from Judea falsely translated the Jews, where it should say, in the Greek it says, Judaioi, meaning the people who were living in Judea. Crucified as Messiah, unjewed, that's a strange word, making a non-Jew of Yeshua as well. The Torah studies of Yeshua were made into Greek love stories. The calling of Yeshua, Messiah, to apply Torah was changed into fake news, that he already fulfilled the law for us. It doesn't say that. It says that he fulfilled for himself. Every rabbi fulfills the law. Every Orthodox Jew fulfills the law to his best way of doing that. But in the same text that Yeshua says that he fulfills the law for his own benefit, he also says 2 verses later on, and Yeshua is not crazy that he contradicts himself. 2 verses later he's pressing his listeners to do the same. Matthew 5 verse 19. So make sure that you have the right Yeshua in front of you. Meet the right Yeshua. You might not have done that yet. You might be a great believer. I'm not saying anything against it. I'm just saying meet the right Yeshua. The one who is recognizable for Israel, because he keeps Torah and does that because his forefather David, on his deathbed, was imploring his son Solomon to keep Torah. David was saying on his deathbed, please Solomon, do this, because if you do it, we will have a king on the throne of Israel. The Jews did, But there were people who changed, like this king, this emperor, Constantine the Great, who changed it. So restore Yeshua into the person that is recognizable for Israel. Please do this, because he keeps Torah and he asks his followers to do the same, which is not only good for the Jews but also good for yourself, because you're on the right track then. Then Yeshua is not some kind of an Egyptian straw, Babylonian or a Roman kind of a weak thing, but Jewish stronghold. It was God's plan that Yeshua would take the sins, the wrongdoings of everybody, anybody who would see his role and his position and recognize him as God on earth. That God, Yeshua would take that on himself. He would bear our responsibility. Isaiah 53, written literally for a Jewish king, for a king, is the text that in the spiritual sense describes much better than only describing this king, what the task and the fate of Yeshua is. Effective for those who believe in his sacrifice. And this is also written in Jewish rabbinical documents in terms of the what is called in the technical term in the rabbinical documents the metatron. Meta, Greek word taken into the Hebrew text. Tron, also a Greek word taken into that same Hebrew text, meaning the person next to the throne. And a very interesting description follows when you look this up on Google. Please do. The tribe who did not share this gift giving to the temple is the tribe of Levi. Aaron and his priests and his Levites were not allowed to give anything for the dedication of the desert sanctuary. What they were allowed to do was to deal with the instrument of heavenly light in this new sanctuary. Now you'll say there is no temple anymore, so what about this? True, no menorah. God knows this. Stolen again in this 70 AD by Roman soldiers under the direction of the general Titus, kept in the church of Constantine the Great in Rome, the Vatican, and still visible on a arch, the Arch of Titus, the Roman general. Within this arch is a big building with high entrances to go through. An arch where you can go like this and go through this, like the Arch of the Triumph in the Place de la Concorde in the city of Paris, with sculpture where the stolen artifacts of our temple, our Jewish temple in Jerusalem, are made visible. Still, you can see this in the picture that is on your screen right now. Roman honoring sculpture on the Forum Romanum in the city of Rome. This arch is built on the highest point of the Via Sacra, on the hill Velia, which is the entrance to the Forum Romanum from the valley of the Colosseum. And this arch is there in stone. More than one of the artifacts that are stolen from our temple are visible there. It's like the Babylonians in the time of the thieving, robbing the temple treasures and bringing them to the palace in Babylon, drinking from the holy vessels and cups and stuff like that. Pope Pius VII made restorations on this Arch of Titus by an Italian architect, Giuseppe Valadier, in 1821. The lamps of when the ark was built, this arch was built, Titus himself was already dead, which perhaps is a symbolic, interesting detail. So the lamps of this lampstand were shining to the center, not to the front, but to the center, to show that the tabernacle itself, the rest of the tabernacle, didn't need the light. Yes, of course, it gave light, but it was not to shine and to make the environment and the campus of this tent more visible. It didn't need that. It was the instrument of light itself that needed to be in the light, and to show that this is an image of the unity between God himself, the light, and his people, the olive oil, symbolism. And then you see that this there is a development in the non-Jewish church, where in the non-Jewish theology, that the people of God, being Israel, are replaced in this theology by non-Jews as God's people. So they needed the menorah for that, this lampstand, because this was in their way. That was a disturbing detail that they needed to get out of there. That was fixed. I think that they, borrowing from the Jewish faith, they should be more modest. They should have been over against the Jews, not giving their own explanation of things, not changing law and dates like Daniel is warning against, and then stealing stuff and making it into another kind of religion. Now, this has nothing to do when you are honestly worshipping God in your church. Nothing. I'm not saying anything against that. I'm just saying that the origins are rotten. It's like it compared to a guest. You have an Airbnb. You rent it out to, and a guest comes and he remodels your whole Airbnb place, not to be recognized anymore for the owner. Not like the Jews cannot. There's no way that the Jews, except the few, the happy few, like me, are able to recognize in all this rubble who Yeshua really is, what the Bible really said and says. So we are restoring this, in not only in Holland but also in Jerusalem and all over the world. You also see in this ark of Titus trumpets. Titus, he never walked through it. He already died before it was built, as I said. But trumpets were used by the Romans to honor their emperors. So no trumpets in the hands of the Jews, because this was profane. They used it to honor their God. We use trumpets in time of war. In Romans 10 verse 9, you can see how actual this is also for the time now. It goes like this: when you go to war in your own land against the adversary, this happened just a week ago, the adversary who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm. Well, nowadays it's done with war sirens, but in that time it was with trumpets. Then you will be remembered for Adonai your God. The trumpet will catch God's attention, and you will be saved from your enemies. But still, war work needs to be done by the soldiers. So it's a text that is comforting on the one hand. On the other hand, we know that when terrorists like Hamas come and attack Israel, work is to be done. So the Romans, I think they thought by themselves, those trumpets, we take them away like the hair of Simpson. If we take it away, it's taking away the identity with the Torah, all the documents, and the lampstand. We take it all away. We take the heart of Israel away. Not so. There have been very many attacks on Israel, but Israel learned through all this misery that yes, Messiah will come, and he will restore all this. And in the meantime, we learn to do without all the outward artifacts. We can also do without, because we learn to worship God in spirit and in truth. There have been many attacks from outside, and darkness came in from outside like a pandemic on Israel. try to stay safe and sound. It's not easy. Israel needed spiritual vaccination in order to stay sound and healthy. But also attacks from inside, like the gossiping by Miriam, the sister of Moses, took place with her brother Aaron. They talked about their brother Moses, which is honestly talked about and transparently talked about in the Bible. So we read it, and when you're not Jewish, you might say, "Oh, those disobedient Jews." Don't say it. Don't say it. That's a trap. Because who does not talk about someone who is not there to someone else? There is this "no one is good on earth, not one" thing again. The table with the showbreads was also stolen, symbol of the 12 tribes. The Romans could try to symbolically make Israel disappear, like you hear the same cry nowadays. Iran and Hamas and stuff like that, Hezbollah. But Israel lives and is a state already for 73 years. And waged war a week ago with new techniques, artificial intelligence, in such a way that it was much less difficult to spare children and schools. And you might think, "Whoa, those bad Jews, they kill children." No, they don't. It's the Hamas party who uses people as shields, and they hope that the children will be killed. So the Hamas people are the killers, and then scream to the world, "See what the Jews have done." But Israel found ways to avoid that, and it's interesting to see how this develops. Let's talk about this Zachariah text that I promised I would talk about. Zechariah 2, verse 10 through 13. "Sing and rejoice, daughter of Zion. Sing and rejoice, for behold, I come." I is God. "And I, God, will dwell in the midst of you, says Adonai." Now remember who the I in this piece is, because it's a very interesting piece of information. "Many nations will join themselves to Adonai in that day when I come." I being Adonai. "And they shall be my people as well. And I will dwell in the midst of you," I being God, "and you shall know that the Lord of armies has sent me to you." See what's going on? God says, I'm God and I'm coming to you. I'm going to live in the midst of you. I was talking about this before, that God is in an unapproachable light. Nobody has ever seen him, but he comes and lives with us, so we will see him. So he comes in a different shape and different form, in a different manifestation. And then God says, "I will come, and when I come and I'm there with you on earth, you will know that the Lord of armies has sent me." But it's God saying that God in heaven has sent him. You see, God is one. This is the formula that Zachariah is describing, that God is one, and when he comes from this unapproachable light, being invisible for people, being light himself, living in the light, comes to live with us, it's only God himself that lives among us, or God is not one. Zechariah is giving the answer and showing that it's possible for God to do this. 12, verse 12, "Adonai will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before Adonai, for he has roused himself from his holy habitation." It's a text that says Messiah is coming. And he did. After the time of Zechariah, God came in the form and shape of Yeshua. Israel needed spiritual vaccination. I hope you received your vaccination already, because you need to stay safe. And the sickness resulting from COVID-19 is horrible. So I wish you well from this place. But we're not finished with the study yet. We're still continuing. Israel needed also spiritual vaccination in order to stay sound and safe and healthy against all this darkness from outside and sometimes from within, as is the same situation with ourselves. That spiritual vaccination came when the prophet Zachariah was proclaiming Messianic prophecies. Moses had done it already. For instance, in Genesis 3:15, he came with a Messianic prophecy. It will come on the screen. I will put enmity between you, God is talking to the serpent, and the woman, and between your offspring and her descendant. This descendant will crush your head. You will only bruise his heel. Abraham is also showing his insight about Messiah when in the first book of Moses, in Genesis 19 verse 24, it is written, but this is the report of what Abraham was experiencing. Adonai rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from Adonai in the heavens. Adonai, the person with two angels, escorted by two angels, sitting at the table where Abraham and Sarah, eating a meal, is traveling to Sodom and Gomorrah. His two angels have been already traveling before him. God stayed because Abraham was trying to change God's mind not to execute this fire and sulfur kind of thing. But there were not 10 righteous people there or more. This man who had been sitting at Abraham's table goes to Sodom and Gomorrah and then rains sulfur and fire. Geologists have found the pieces of this in the neighborhood of the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. Arrives this man called Adonai, Yud He Vav He, the four-letter name, to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and comes with his sulfur and fire. This man, this earthly man, being God, and he throws this stuff from God in heaven. There you have not the Trinity, but the duality of God. God in heaven, God on earth. Interesting. And yet, God on earth is this Messiah, a personality that I'm talking about. And not a person in the sense of different than God. Yes, he was a person on earth, but being God, God is one. God in heaven, God on earth. There's another text that Moses presents to us in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 and 18. Let's read it also. Adonai your God will raise up for you, Moses says, a prophet from the midst of you, of your brothers, like me, Moses. You will have to listen to him. And then in verse 18, God is saying the same, repeating, I, Adonai, will raise up a prophet from among their brothers, like you, Moses. I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I will command him. You see that God on earth is a puppet, in a sense, in the hands of God in heaven, so that the work of God in heaven is done by his. Isaiah 53 is describing exactly this, that he does the work, that the work of God in heaven is done, is executed on earth. And then this text, interesting text, also the prophet of Hosea, and we read this not long ago, chapter 2 verse 15, about the door of hope. I will give Israel vineyards from here, and the valley of Achor for a door of hope. Yeshua is using this term, door, for himself, to show that this Hosea text is also a messianic promise. The prophet Daniel is also promising Messiah and saying that he will live and die at the time of the destruction of the temple, which is very interesting, pinpointing the position and the place and the timing of Messiah. Daniel 9:26. After the 62 weeks, the anointed one shall be cut off, while they have no evidence against him. The people of the Roman ruler who will come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So this is a very interesting text. And today then the prophet Zachariah, who has seen much misery and darkness in his time. He lives after the captivity of Israel in Babylon, in the time that Ezra and Nehemiah were rebuilding the temple after it had been destroyed by soldiers of the enemy. Life in Israel was totally destroyed. Economy had to be rebuilt totally. Everything, like in countries now with COVID. Imagine how fast that, how feeble we are. Everything had to come into motion again. Schools, hospitals, business. It was being rebuilt. Jeremiah had proclaimed this and prophesied about this captivity in the 100 years before that time, and Zachariah was calling the people to have their faith restored. And what does he say? In verse 10, I'm repeating now his text again. He says, "Sing and rejoice, daughter of Zion, Israel. For behold, I come and I will dwell in the midst of you, says Adonai." In the darkness of the world, Messiah comes to live with us. Not when it's light, when it's pleasant, not when there is peace, more and more peace and more advanced ways to maintain peace, but in the midst of chaos. So don't say, oh, when there's chaos, people cry for Messiah. No, it's the other way around. It is God plans it this way. He knows that when there is chaos, people will realize they need Messiah, and so Messiah appearances in the Bible, descriptions of his appearances, have always been in times of stress and distress. Not when it's light, but when there's darkness around Israel. Verse 11, many nations shall join themselves to Adonai on that day. They will be my people. I will dwell in the midst of you. And then Jeremiah shows that non-Jews will come to faith in the God of Israel. I will say that again. Jeremiah makes known that also non-Jews will come to faith in the God of Israel. That says something about the way the non-Jews should behave toward the people that already know this God of Israel, and show the right Yeshua in their faith, so that there's no misleading and misguidance and deception in translating the words of the Bible. The Bible is okay. The translations and the interpretations are not always okay, and we need to restore that. It's a busy situation. At that moment that the peoples in the world, the people groups, the nations will come to the people of Israel, comes the understanding that God who has been sent is God himself. That's what Jeremiah says in verse 11, the second part. Then at that moment you will know that the Lord of armies has sent me to you, when I was sent to live in your midst, says Adonai. You see the interesting text? It's God himself who calls himself me and I will dwell in your midst, and I will be sent by the Lord in heaven. But it's God himself who's speaking. So Jeremiah, he is revealing something which is known, and already from Genesis known. Messiah will come. You could expect it, and those who are spiritual enough will know. For them, he will not come as a thief in the night. They will know. They will feel that he is coming. Not when it's light, but when it's darkness, like the priests who were lighting the lamps of the lampstand when it was dark. Beautiful symbolism. It says something about the evil spirit in the Babylonian Empire and the Roman Empire. And not only those empires. Read, please, with me, Isaiah 60, verse 2 and 3, as a revealing text in this content. Behold, darkness will cover the earth, and gross darkness the nations. But Adonai will rise on you, Israel, and his glory shall be seen upon you. He's talking to Israel, as Isaiah. Nations will come to your light, the word light again, and kings to your bright development. So there is also, that is the Jewish vision of the future of the world. There's the light of Israel that will grow and shine more and more, and the nations will come to Israel, not change the religion that they borrow from us Jews, but leaving it as it is, and then there will very important, major was the word I was looking for, major changes, corrections in the Christian faith have to take place. Back to Torah and the most important, interesting thing. Numbers 8 verse 2. Speak to Aaron and tell him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps need to give the light to the center. The interesting thing is it's a face to face to the center of this lampstand. And the important thing is, and the exceptional thing is, that the light doesn't project forward, but to the stem of this lampstand. This is the way God is saying it, commanding it, as if he says this light is not new. It's not like we have a dark place and we're going to... I was saying that the light comes in the darkness. Yes, but the light cannot enlighten the darkness. The darkness will not grasp, will not understand the light. You know this text in the New Testament. So the light is there, but not to make things visible there. No, to show here's the light. This light, it looks like it's always been there. It is enlightening. It's shining by itself, showing itself, and then when it's visible, you realize, oh yes, that's the light that has always been there. There was in Genesis, in the first verses, where God calls the light. He doesn't create it; always been there. He calls it. So this is the task of the high priest. Making light when darkness falls, and the light was there already, but the light needs to be shown in the darkness. Protection of the Lord will be there, was there, and will be there always. A light instrument, lighting to show itself, to show that God is always there. Last text of today is in the Berit Chadashah in the New Testament, Ephesians 5, 6 through 13. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes on the children of disobedience, the children of darkness. Therefore don't be partakers with them, for you were, when it says you in the text of Paul, it's always the non-Jews. When he says we, it's always the Jews. Make a Bible study and you'll find out. For you were once darkness, but are now light by the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the result, and he calls Israel already, you are the children of light, so you to get those texts together and you see. For the result of the light is pure goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is well pleasing to God. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather even reprove them. For the things which are done by them is in secret, it is a shame even to speak of. But all things, when they are reproved, are revealing by the light, for everything that reveals is light. So there is text in which Aaron and the other Levites have the honor of the application of the lampstand, and again because there's a spiritual light which is the basis of this lampstand. It's a continuing phenomenon. Later on, the light will be stolen in the time of the Maccabees. Then the light will be restored by a descendant of Aaron. Then there would be no, in that time there would be no 10 tribes. But now, after the year 70, the Romans stole the light, and they are keeping it. And so we need to realize that this light is important, but we're not depending on outward light. We're asked to worship God in spirit and truth, and that means there needs to be light in ourselves. So Paul is saying, look for the light. Don't look for the darkness. Don't join the darkness. Also, the representation of who Yeshua is. The wrong description of Yeshua is darkness. Be careful. Be very careful. Yochanan, the letters of John, the biblical letter writer, is confirming this. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 8 through 11. I write a commandment you need to renew, which is true for him and for you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light already shines. See, the same things. He who says he is in the light, but he hates his brother, is in the darkness even until now. This John is a very Torah observant Jew, but also very practical, as you can tell. He who loves his brother remains in the light, and there is no occasion for stumbling in him. But he who hates his brother is in the darkness, walks in the darkness. He doesn't know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. So the true light is already shining, and the key is love, as John says. So what you need in the light is these things. Don't be misguided. Don't join darkness. Don't hate your brother in faith. He might say different things about certain aspects of the faith, and there might be changes and corrections but don't hate each other. We're not preaching hate. We're preaching texts, study, insight, vision, and then trying to convince each other. Realize that light is coming when you learn to know God, recognize that He is in our midst, and do Torah, the Torah commandments. It's not written there for nothing. So the light is very important in our lives. I cannot say it in any different way. Darkness cannot grasp the light. No weapon that is built against us will be successful. So light is very important, again, in our lives. Light calls God's children, shows the way to His kingdom, and when we begin to see God's kingdom, nobody, no enemy can keep us from that. I want to end the study with light therapy. Light therapy is what the Bible is prescribing for us. The prescription is be partakers of the light. The New Testament is saying it, but you see that the texts of Moses are very clear about it as well. And the way to do this is not something New Age thing. It's just following the Bible. There's no practice in there like I'm doing today, but there are hints in the Bible too clear to skip. Light therapy is not imagining that there is light. No. Light therapy for yourself is becoming aware that God's light is around you, is with you. He's communicating through the light, and your spirit is the translator, bringing it into feelings, into impression, even into words. So if you want to close your eyes to not be distracted perhaps, let the light become aware of the light, and let bitterness and sorrow and missing a dear person, or missing a person who's perhaps not so dear but you miss him anyway, be melting in God's light, because God's light is healing, is for your well-being. Fear of death, bring it into the light. Strong feelings of wrath against a horrible, nasty person, let God's light come, let Him deal with it. He's the one who does wrath in the Bible. Depression, the depressive thoughts, or even depression itself within yourself, and the fear of becoming crazy. Let God's light shine on the honest feelings that you know are in you when you have these things. Sickness, God will heal all sickness, not perhaps in this life, but you can have already God's light in order to realize that sickness is a way sometimes to turn to do self, exploration and insight, addiction, and you can find out words for yourself to know what you need to have this light for your benefit. I want to end with 3 Psalms while we, those of you who still have their eyes closed, let the words of these Psalms come with delight into your soul, is one way of saying it. Words are sometimes not enough to describe all these things. So bear with me. Last 3 Psalms. The first Psalm, it comes on the screen. So if you say, but I want to write it down, you don't have to. You can review this video and you'll see the Psalms written on the screen, shown on the screen. The first one is Psalms 56, verse 14. You, God, you have delivered my soul from death. I'm being in the light and I'm receiving this information that you delivered my soul from death and you prevented my feet from falling, so that I may walk before you, God, in the light of the living. Feel God's healing with his light. Also in the second of the 3, Psalm 89, verse 16. Blessed are the people that know the Torah, which is a Hebrew word meaning the sound of the shofar, beginning with Abraham and his son, ending with the coming of Messiah with the sound of the shofar. Because these people, they walk in the light of your presence. Psalm 89, verse 16. Blessed are the people that knows the sound of the shofar and realize what that means. The coming of God, according to the words of Zachariah today, Zachariah. Because with that sound of the shofar, already now we walk in the light of your presence. Third Psalm. Let these words also come into your soul. Psalm 97, verse 11. 97, verse 11. Light is sown. Interesting choice of words. Light is sown for the righteous. Now don't be disheartened. It doesn't say it's only for the righteous. It is saying for those who want to be righteous. Light is sown for the righteous, and gladness for the upright in heart. Light is meant for you to be there so that you can grow in righteousness and in being upright in heart. And with that, you can keep your eyes closed if you want, or open them, but I'm saying have a good week. Still enjoy the Shabbat if it's there, and if not, then enjoy the rest of the week. Chase after truth, also in terms of what the Bible says about Shabbat, about Yeshua. Don't turn Yeshua into someone else than he really is. A Jewish brother like Moses, but it's God himself. Projection of God through his light on earth, and it's for your well-being to have the things that God wants, because then you are walking in his will. Shabbat Shalom, all the best, and be healthy and stay healthy.